Hi, Megi. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. Same first question as you've listened to a couple of episodes already. You'll know what it is. What's the hardest change that's happened to you in your life?
So, hi Gareth. So lovely to be on your podcast, first of all. I think one of the biggest challenges is probably, I guess, first of all, moving to London after kind of living in the kind of this bubble in Coventry. And I went to, in terms of where I grew up in Coventry and I went to Warwick University. And that was really, a big change for me. But in the sense of, if anyone's familiar with Coventry and Warwick, is very, very close to home. And, I still had all of my comfort around me. My mum was really close and she could always come and, help me with things. And, university is quite a challenging part of your life anyway, because you're trying to find your feet, trying to find who you are. And I think, in then once I kind of finished that, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So first of all, I went and I did a little stint in Mallorca as a travel rep with Thomas Cook, which was interesting to say the least. It taught me a lot of different things. But then, I came back and I wanted to kind of, start my career in something. And I decided to take up a graduate program in London with Premier Inn. It was actually a new concept. It was hubbed by Premier Inn, which is essentially, I don't know if you ever stayed in one, but it's essentially like the more kind of tech-driven sister brand of your Premier Inn. And I think it was super exciting at the time. And I kind of just, took it and was really happy I got it. But I think actually moving to London and having to stand on my own 2 feet was really difficult. And I think no one really prepares you for London living, number one, which is, this crazy, busy, huge city. And I think the other thing is as well that in terms of things like the living situation, everything was completely out of my comfort zone because I was sharing with strangers, I was sharing in a house of five, having to do everything by myself and navigate around London, first of all. So I think that was one of the most challenging things that I've probably ever faced. And that was really something that I think you had to be really resilient. And there was days when I was like, oh my God, I need to go home. I hate this. I don't want to do this anymore. But then I think it really made me a lot stronger in terms of it got me out of that comfort zone. And even though I found it challenging a lot, I think it really prepped me for kind of where I'm now going into my career, and also, moving out of that kind of bubble that I was in, not having all of that comfort, it really pushes you to be stronger as a person.
So, what was most difficult about making that move? And living with strangers, as you said.
Yeah, so I think it was really the fear of kind of the unknown, to be honest, initially, because I didn't know who they were. I got this sort of crappy estate agency who didn't really tell me much. I went and saw it once and didn't really ever see it again until moving day. And I think that was really hard. And I think there wasn't really any kind of, so the people that I lived with, they were great, but they were kind of really into that kind of London living where I think we are guilty sometimes of, we're so caught up in our own lives that there's not really any other time. And I'm guilty of it as well. We don't kind of sit back and like see, is anyone struggling? Does anyone need any help? And they were very much like that, busy working individuals. We all had different routines and all of that. So I think that was the most difficult, trying to actually, find somebody that I could have as support in terms of telling me, where things are or how things work here. And I think the other thing that was really difficult is that as part of the graduate program with Premier Inn, and I think it's a great thing in hindsight, but you have to basically do all of the roles that you're going to eventually manage. So you had to do kind of 2 months in each role. And my first role was housekeeping in hotels. And as you can imagine, it was just kind of exhaustion, it was tiredness. I was doing the exact same kind of shifts and patterns. And I think that was just really overwhelming because when you kind of you graduate university, you think, oh, I'm going to go into a really amazing office job and I'm going to, dress smart and things. And actually, the reality of it is, especially if you go into hospitality, that isn't the case at all. So I think it was just adjusting to that and kind of managing what my expectations were to then what reality was.
Yeah, I did a year in hospital. Well, I spent many years in hospitality, but I did a year in hospitality doing my degree. Doing a sandwich degree, and I always remember that. I thought I was fairly good at most roles, and then I went to housekeeping, and I was just dreadful at it.
So difficult. It's really, and I applaud anyone in that role because it's so physically and mentally demanding. And I think, we take it for granted sometimes, and you can be so quick. When I was in, the managerial role then at the hotel, I was kind of like trying to empathize with them more because I'd done the role. So if there was, a little scuff, or if there was a dust mark and so on, you have to just really have that kind of in you. And I think the only reason I was empathizing so much with them is because I did it and I know how hard it is. Otherwise, I just think I would have taken it as, okay, they're not really doing a great job, or, so I think it's really important that we all do something like that in our role, where it's, you don't just start straight at the top and managing, because I don't think you can manage people if you don't understand what they have to do on a day-to-day basis.
I think that's great advice. I think so. Going back, obviously, you said you grew up in Coventry and then went to Warwick. Did you live out, or did you live at home when you were studying at Warwick?
So, funnily enough, I actually lived out in my first year. I lived in kind of campus halls, and that was great, meeting a lot of new people. And I was really conscious that I wanted to do that because I didn't want to, my sister actually did a similar thing, and she'll say I copied her and everything in life, but that's not true. But she did actually do a degree, the same degree as I did at university, and she lived in. And I saw that sometimes she was missing out on things, like she'd have to come home at X time because maybe the public transport or one of us would have to give her a lift. So I was really conscious that I wanted to be part of that kind of first year. And, you have that mentality that you have to make your group of friends in that first year, otherwise you'll be alone in the next years of university. So, and that's not true, by the way, at all. There's people that you meet and come and go the whole time. But I did live out. And then in my second, third and fourth year, because I did a joint honours, I lived back home. But, I got my driving licence and I was able to do all of that stuff. But it's such a different experience.
Would you change that now? Would you live out the whole time, live at home the whole time?
So I think actually I would probably, whoever, and also if anyone was listening to this that has gone through or is going through that, I would say I probably made the mistake of having my university a little bit too close to home. I think I still had that comfort and that bubble so close to me that I didn't fully, be out there, and I could always go running back to my mum and so on. So I think the only thing I would say that I would change is that I would probably move where I choose to, have my university, simply because I think when you're close to home, it doesn't let you get that full experience, because, Leamington Spa was where we'd go out. And for everyone that was so new, but that's so close to where I am. So I already knew. So I think that would be what I would say. And I would say you don't have to live out the whole time. I think, I know with the cost of living and everything, it's actually getting really, really competitive now. But I think at least try a couple of years, or even just one, like I did, to live out and really just learn to stand on your own 2 feet.
Yes, you did that when you moved to London. So you chose to do business and law. Why did you choose that?
So I was always, to be honest, not anything kind of, it was inspiring or anything. I was always quite good at business. So in A levels, in GCSEs, kind of all of that, that was really kind of one of my strongest points, and I really did enjoy that. And, I thought it's something that I'm good at and I'm going to play to my strengths. So I'm going to do that. With the law side, I think I'd always been interested in it, but I was never kind of 100% into, do I want to be a lawyer? What is a lawyer? Solicitor, a barrister and so on. And I think the fact that I could do both in my degree was something that I think was really useful for me, because I got to see a glimpse of both. And also I didn't really want to close myself into only having that business degree. I wanted to, after university, maybe I could explore the legal side, maybe I could explore the business side. And I think that was basically the decision as to why I took that joint honours.
So then, was it next you went to Mallorca? Was that what happened next?
Yes, so everything went out of the plan. The whole life plan that was made up throughout university absolutely went to pot. So yeah, I mean, to be really honest, I think once you finish university, it's really weird, because I think especially with somewhere like Warwick, there's so many people that, you know, and I will be very honest, I come from a very kind of working class background, and there are others, you know, who are more fortunate in the sense that their parents are in that profession. They've got, you know, barrister parents, lawyers, and so on. And I think their connections are stronger, but also they're more equipped to, you know, put in those applications to that, you know, the five in London, or do kind of more equipped for that. So I think when I left university, I didn't really have a plan, as sort of most of my peers did, which were they'd already had, you know, a VAC scheme in law, and they were going to go into kind of a fully blown training contract. I didn't really have that. And I think I wanted to do something which was completely different, that didn't require me to put any pressure on myself in terms of I have to be somewhere that everyone else is. And I think that's why I just went, you know, for 6 months. I just thought, I'm going to just diminish all responsibility. I'm going to go out there and meet some new people. But also, you know, all jokes aside, that job did, so I was kind of meeting, greeting people on holiday and so on. It did actually teach me a lot of communication skills, and it opened me up to people that I would never have otherwise crossed paths with, because, you know, your circle of friends at school, your circle of friends at university, you don't ever, you know, go ahead and meet a couple, maybe 60, 70-year-old couple sharing their life thoughts with you, because it just doesn't happen unless it's in your role or you stumble across them. So I think, you know, even though it's a lot of people laugh when I say it, I actually think in terms of life lessons learned, it was a really eye-opening experience.
It's funny, like you talked about throwing yourself outside of your comfort zone, and we'll come on to, you know, other roles you've been in. But, you know, as I read your story, it feels like you're constantly throwing yourself out of your comfort zone, even though you said you found it quite difficult. Was it like that when you were out there with Thomas Cook?
Yeah, it was. I mean, imagine, you know, going to Mallorca, and I'd never even been to Mallorca, by the way, before this point. And, you know, you get picked up, you get given this uniform. I even had a car. God knows how they trust me to drive it on the other side of the road. And basically there, you know, you have to go out there and you have to, you know, provide that service, and, you know, selling the trips and things like that. And that was, you know, really different for me because I'd never done anything like it before. But I actually loved it. And I must admit, you know, when we talk about the other things that I've gone on to do, I always have this thing in my head that sometimes I feel like I'm going to do something completely different to what I do now, because it will teach me something new. And even if it doesn't work, if I get fixated on something, I have to do it. And it's not that, you know, I want to, you know, make my life a living hell or anything like that, but it's more that I think we need to keep changing. We need to keep pushing ourselves into these situations in order for us to be, you know, to know how to deal with anything that comes at you in life. And that's really why I did it. And my mum was, you know, completely distraught. She thought, you've done 4 years at Warwick University, you've got an amazing degree, and now you're going to be a travel rep in Mallorca. You can imagine. She was so distraught. But, you know, and then I came back, and she was really happy for me. And I didn't actually have a lot of contact with them when I was out there, so I would call them and things, but they didn't come out and I didn't come back. And I came back, you know, different. I was more mature, I was more ready to kind of do, you know, adult things in the world. So yeah.
And again, we'll come on to the other roles, but one thing that struck me from reading all the roles that you've done, including your current one, again, which we'll talk about later, is they've always been customer facing. So, you know, whether that be Premier Inn, Thomas Cook, Homes for Students, and currently with Yardi, it always feels like you've been customer facing. Yet you studied law and business at university. So I wonder where that comes from, to, you know, that sort of that, you know, customer facing, you know, you're either one of those people or not, right? You know, you know, like you end up in a customer facing role. You know, were your parents in similar roles, or, you know, how did you come to do that?
So I think my parents, so my mum is definitely, I'm definitely, you know, my mum's daughter. We are very similar in personality, and she's always been in kind of customer facing roles, and she's very much in the care sector. So she works with, you know, people with learning difficulties and things like that. And, you know, I always admired her for the work that she did. And before that, she was in kind of hospitality type things. My dad was complete opposite. He's very kind of, you know, in himself, doesn't really socialize and engage. And I think the one thing that I've always loved since I was little is that I love to be around people. I love to speak to people. And I think that was the main kind of driver in all of these roles, is that I don't want to be cooped up in, an office where I never actually see or, see the experience of something that I'm selling or something that I'm talking about or working on, to see how that actually affects the end person. So I think being in those customer roles, first of all, I love to speak, as you can probably see, but also I think I just learn a lot from, I'm kind of like a sponge. I take a lot from other people, and I think that's what I'll always sort of do, and that's what I've always been drawn to. Things like numbers, number crunching, financy type things have never really been something that are my strength. So I think the other thing that I do to kind of have the balance is I do a bit of that, but actually the majority of it is speaking to people and delivering service in whatever role that might be.
So we briefly touched on the Hub by Premier Inn, the management training scheme, and and I mentioned that I did something similar. For anyone that's not been through a year in that, going around different departments, tell them what that's like.
The nice version. No, so it sounds like I'm super negative about it, and actually I'm not. I think when I look back on it, it was one of the most stressful but rewarding times. I think you need to be prepared to graft. You need to be prepared to get really stuck in. And I think going into, and I was doing things like night shifts with the night team, then I was doing housekeeping and so on. I think you need to have kind of any kind of preconceptions, any expectations out of the window. I think companies have this thing where you look and you speak to kind of, I guess, senior or managerial type roles, and they'll tell you this is the process and this is what everyone does and so on. And it's not really until you do that role or you work with the people that are actually on that front line every day that you actually understand that things are a little bit different to that's been portrayed, for instance, and not all processes are well. And I think that's okay. I think people need to kind of understand that nowhere is going to be perfect, and you should never expect kind of what you get at face value from a company, in the sense that unless you've done it for a while and you understand the people, the way that it works, I think you'll never really know. So I think don't be scared of it, is what I would say. I think be prepared to work hard, be exhausted, sometimes question why you're doing it, but at the same time, believe me when I say it teaches you so much. And the other thing that I think it taught me so much is that anytime now that, or when I've been in managerial roles, at the moment I don't manage a team in my current role, but in student accommodation, and when I was the manager at the Premier Inn and the hotels, it teaches you a lot about kind of empathy and real life problems, in terms of if your team are late one day, or if they have an issue, or maybe they're underperforming. I think you can understand it more because kind of the exhaustion and the habits that they have at work and so on. So I think it teaches you a lot more than just about that role. It teaches you how to kind of be in kind of a people's person, and also really just empathize with what they're going through. And there was always I met this amazing lady at the hotel, and I was doing housekeeping, and she had 3 children. She was a single mother, and she was working day in, day out, and she was just exhausted, and she had to do everything, not only obviously in work at 100% full speed, but also at home. And I think and there were days when she was the happiest person you will ever meet, but then there was other days where things would get on top of her. And I think we need to be more empathetic towards that, because a lot of people face that. And I think you see actually that a lot of people mask what they're actually going through, and we put on a brave face, which is great, but I think it's also okay to be vulnerable sometimes and ask for help.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think we'd recommend anyone to spend some time working in a hotel or a hospitality business.
100%. Yeah. I mean,
it's
Gareth, what
hard.
did you find about what were your takeaways?
I mean, again, you find an ability to keep going. I'm not quite sure where that comes from, particularly on lack of sleep. And
Yeah.
And I think you're right about putting a mask on. I think it was very much you are taught that front of house and back of house, and you're almost on stage. It's a cliche in the hospitality industry, like front of house is stage, but it's right. You become an actor. Your personal life, your stress, your worrying about the big conference you've got tomorrow, whilst you're trying to deal with the small one you've got
Yeah.
today. I think it's, I think it definitely teaches you a lot of resilience. And I think I read something recently about resilience, and it really applied to hospitality. Was and I don't want to misquote it, but it's not about your ability to keep going; it's your ability to bounce back. And I think that's you're constantly doing that in hospitality when things don't necessarily go as you'd expect. So
Which happens a lot, right?
talking about roles where things happen that you don't expect, you then went to work in student accommodation. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I did. So I kind of did the hotels for a while, and then I thought, I want something different. I want something where, I'm working still in kind of the front facing role, but something, a little bit different and also a little bit more responsibility. So I moved to, the kind of the property manager at homes for students, and I was managing 3 properties in London. And to say the least, that was another kind of throwing me in at the deep end, to be really honest, because students are a whole different category, number one. I mean, you think hospitality is challenging. I think with students, and I completely get it, that they're in a new place, and we all went to, whoever did go to university will understand it, and they don't know, how to do things, or how to do things, adult things like laundry and clean the rooms and things like that. And I don't blame them, but I think it was great as an experience, but I think that it also taught me a lot about what you should actually be delivering against kind of the resource and the budgets that you have. So, a lot of people might think that if they've got a problem where they're living, the rental or the student accommodation, that they'll put in the maintenance request, and, if it doesn't get sorted, typically they will say, it's the property manager's fault, it's the maintenance team that, they're not bothered to do it or lazy. And I think actually what I did face a lot there was that actually in terms of resource and budgets and constraints and so on, there are so many other different levels to it than what you think is kind of just at the property team. So it's about, are the investors putting in the amount of resource? Is there, people that are, for instance, we've not got the budget for it, or we've overspent, or we've got other priorities, you need to fix X before you fix Y. So I think that was a lot of kind of, I would say it's a juggling act there. That was definitely, I was juggling so many different balls in terms of, the property issues, that buildings are hard, especially when, and I would say not only especially when they're old, because even new ones, snagging issues, things like that, contractors, suppliers, all of it. But I think the other thing that was really difficult is also kind of trying to deliver for those students. And I think it's different in a hotel, because in a hotel, they come and go, they'll be there 1-2 nights, maybe a bit longer, and then they'll leave, and maybe you've managed to change their view of your hotel in that kind of 2-3 days or not. But with student, they're living there all the time, and I feel like there was a greater responsibility to ensure that we were doing what was best for those students. And mixed in with kind of your maintenance and your property issues were also things like mental health of students, and it was things that I was never exposed to in the hotels. And there's a lot of things like counseling services that were coming in, and it was brilliant to see all the support. But also, what do you do, and how do you know what to do when a student comes to you and says, I'm having a really hard time? And I think that was kind of something which I did learn quite quickly, and it was something that was really quite prevalent, and I was always kind of a bit blind to it, I think, in previous roles, because I never had young people living in the place that I'm operating or managing, and they really do become like your little family, and you then start being invested in them. And I'm the kind of person that if something's wrong, it will play on my mind until I fix it, or I know that it's sorted. So it did take quite a kind of a mental, not just physical toll on me, if I'm honest, the whole kind of student, I guess, accommodation, being around students and so on.
I think that's really important message, and particularly for this bubble of student accommodation, which you still very much operate in current role, which we'll talk about. But I think the role that the property manager, or whatever they're called in particular, operator is, that knowing that when they go home, those students are still living there, and you do become responsible for them. Yet you're also a landlord and you just,
Yeah.
you're renting rooms to people. I think that line of responsibility is really hard to tread. And I think those that are good at it tend to tread the side that they look after the students, as much as they
Yeah,
possibly can.
exactly.
So then you went to work for Yardi in a tech role. So again, another pivot, perhaps out of your comfort zone, perhaps not. So how did that role come about?
So I think, I had done student for a little while, and as I mentioned, I'm quite kind of I would say I'm quite I would say sensitive soul, in the sense that not in the sense of like my day to day and the way that I, come across on things like, work environment, but, talking about kind of the mental toll it has on you working with individuals and so on. And I found like it was just a constant struggle for me in student to provide, what I thought was best for them, and then also meet the demands of the business and the investors and so on. So I kind of said, I need a break from it all. And I actually left that role with nothing else planned, and that was scary because I was like, oh, I'm not getting an income this month, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think I just really kind of took my time. And people always say, apply to as many jobs as possible and someone will come back, and, it's kind of quantity game, not quality. And I actually didn't take that advice at all from a lot of, my friends who were saying it, because my idea was that I left that role because I wanted something better for me. I don't want to just go into something else because it's all that there was. And I was lucky, I was fortunate. I had a little bit of savings so I could get by a couple of months. And I really just kind of, spoke with recruiters, first of all. And recruiters are, I would say, on the whole, the ones I had were great. I mean, some of them are a little bit, I would say, a little bit pushy at times, a little bit kind of, they try and draw you into things which perhaps you hadn't really, kind of thought about before. So you'll say, I want to do X role, and then they'll give you something totally different, and you're like, not sure if it's for me. And then I think if you get to the point where you're like, right, am I going to take this because I need a job, or am I going to be stand true and firm to what I said at the beginning, which is I want to move when it's right? And I actually didn't really apply to that many places. I had a couple where it was very much kind of, it was still kind of operational roles, which were, it was a boutique hotel was one of the roles, managing that and so on. And it was things that I'd always done before. And then Yardi came along, and I was like, oh God, what do I know about technology and systems, And I thought, oh God, I'm not going to be good at this role. And I had the interview and I thought to myself, this is never going to happen. I'm not going to get this role. It's not really something, but I said, I want to try it because I want to understand more about it. And I met, my current manager, funnily enough, now, and there's a couple of other people who are, great colleagues still of mine at the moment. And it just changed. I just thought, yeah, I want to be part of it. And even though I never really been that techie, thinking about it logically, I'd worked with this technology that we're now selling my whole career, because in the hotels we had the technology, then I went to student and so on. So I thought, how hard could it be? And yeah, I never really looked back, and I've been here coming up to 4 years now, which is scary. But yeah, the story is always, when people say, have you always been into tech, and did you always know you wanted to do this? And there's no point lying about it. No, I had no idea. And actually I've just fallen into something which I'm quite good at now. And it was the best decision for me. But I think that's really important to anyone also listening, though, that you always have kind of in your mind something that I think you think you're good at, and then you want to do it. But I think don't ever kind of shy away from other opportunities which are a little bit different, because actually it could grow into something which is great. And I think that's really important, because if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be in the role that I am today.
You said you weren't very techie. Are you techie now?
No. I'm getting better, but I would say as well, in terms of techie and what we do at Yardi, and you'll know kind of the system, and I won't kind of go into any of the techie side. But I think it's not really about being techie. It's about knowing how you can use a software to actually help you in your day to day, And I look back so many times when I show other people Yardi products, and they're like, actually, that would really help us. The first thing I think when something new comes out is, God, I wish I had that when I was in, the student accommodation role, or I wish the maintenance guy had that app because it would have helped him. And, and I still think about those individuals, and more that we could have done from a tech perspective. But, it's one of those things, it will keep growing and it will keep changing. And, in 5 years' time, there'll probably be something that will do all of it for us and we won't need to think about it anymore. So yeah, I think it has definitely been something really different. And I would actually say that this is probably the happiest I've been in my role in my career to date.
And one thing I know you do, having been part of it, is doing product demonstrations. Now, for somebody that says they're, aren't the most techie, although you perhaps are now, do you get nervous doing a product demo?
All the time, I won't lie. You'd think 4 years into it, you wouldn't get nervous anymore and you'd treat it as just like, any other demo. But I would say, yeah, I do, because you want to, you have a lot kind of small time slot to show these people what the system does. And it's not just about showing you, click this button and it does this. It's about engaging you to the point where you think, actually, she's given me what it does, but also the benefit, and I can see how that will help me. So I think, if I ever was to, I think, not be nervous about it, then I'd probably signal to me that I need a change. Because I think it's good to have nerves. I think obviously, don't, you shouldn't be nervous to the point where, you're facing kind of anxiety and things like that. But I think a little bit of nerves are always important, because for me, I'm very much, if I have a deadline or if I have, some sort of pressure. Now, this isn't kind of, pressure that I have to deliver 1,000-word report back the next morning, because that's crazy and I haven't done anything to it. But if I had kind of pressure, or even in a demo environment where there's an audience, I think it's always good to have a little bit of nerves, because that adrenaline just keeps you going. And I won't lie, sometimes it's really hard. You have kind of the product overviews, which are maybe an hour and a half, and you wow them and they love it and they want to see more. But then you also do get times when they don't get it, they don't, or they don't, maybe they've got a preconception about what the product does, or maybe they've already got something else. There's a political issue within the organization where they don't want to change. And I think, we're asking a big thing. Somebody that has known a system their whole life, or for a couple of years, and they're comfortable with it, we're saying to them, oh, scrap that, use our system because it's best. So I think you need to have that kind of adrenaline, those nerves, but also to keep up that energy, because they're spending a lot of money on kind of software, and I think it's only right that we deliver to them the best kind of demo, or the best RFP or anything like that we can, because it's a really serious issue for them in their organization.
I think, and the reason I asked the question is obviously we've talked through all your different roles and how they've added pieces to, and I wonder which bits of those, because I've sat in product demos, and I always try to have empathy for the person doing it, because you're right, normally the audience is a bit mixed. There's some people that may not want it, aren't that interested, think it's going to be painful changing, and then you've got the people, usually like me as a big fan of software, going, come on, we need this, that's great, let's get it. And that's the reason I ask whether it's nervous, because I always think that preparing for one of those demos must be really tough. But I'm wondering, do you draw on your experience in, whether it be in Premier Inn or Thomas Cook, or even with Homes for Students, to trying to putting on that performance? It is kind of a performance, right?
It is, absolutely, it's a performance. And I think, it's funny because my friends joke about this, and they're like, are you going into presenter mode now? And I'm like, okay, don't disturb me, it's presenter mode. And it's, it's not about putting on like, a fake conversation or dialogue, but it is very much a show, and I always say to people, especially, whenever you're presenting, you will always have nerves. So for instance, and I can draw upon other experiences. So funnily enough, with Thomas Cook, I had to pick people up from the airport, and when you go on the coach and they tell you, welcome to Mallorca, and this is, on the left you have XYZ and so on, that was nerve-wracking for me. I was like, what if they don't, don't understand me, or what if they hate me, and things like that, always these things in the back of your mind. And I think it's only if you have to practice it and practice it and practice it. I think if you shy away from opportunities to do it, and I mean, my job doesn't let me do that now, but I think for anyone listening who doesn't have a job where they're presenting all the time, I think it's really important that you take the opportunities if you are given them, or ask for opportunities to speak in public or to an audience of people, because I think it helps you with your confidence, number one. And no one is born with confidence, in the sense that no one knows how to present, or no one knows how to pronounce the words, or say, you have to pick all of this up. And I think the only way you'll learn is if you do it a lot of those times. And the other important thing of that is that if you are scared to do something, I think the more you do it, you can start controlling those kind of nerves or that anxiety. And don't get me wrong, I get it all the time. I had to present last year in our annual conference, YASC. And I was in kind of the opening session, and there was a lot of more kind of senior people with me. And, I look up to them. They're, people that I want to be like one day. And I was asked to do it. And I was like, oh God, are they sure they've got the right person, and so on. But, I did it, and I was super scared. And the night before, my nerves were, oh God, what if I say something wrong? But actually, it doesn't matter, because people don't hang on to a word you didn't pronounce right. People don't do that. In fact, actually, what I think is, people want to see someone who is engaging, and you could say anything to them. As long as you're engaging them, I think you've got them.
I think that's right. And it's, I've said before on this podcast that when I go back and edit afterwards, I never really edit what the guest says. It's always if I've said something, and I'm getting better at that, trying to overcome that, sort of. But yeah, you just need to talk, and as long as you're engaging with people, I think that's absolutely right. So talking about Yardi, we were talking before we start recording about how people associate Yardi mainly with residential in the US. How is it growing in the UK now?
Yeah, so I think, I mentioned a few times about how I have been here for coming up to 4 years now. And I think even in the time that I've been here, it's changed massively. So for anyone kind of that is familiar with Yardi, essentially I would say the core offering is very much, our messaging is that it's one single database, it's one solution. And before, that we had a lot of we had Voyager, which was kind of and I would like to think of Voyager as kind of the kind of the bread and butter of what we did, which was hardcore kind of accounting, financial reporting, and so on. And that was really, really great. And I think the problem was that we've kind of seen, though, is that there's users that don't necessarily need to have that view. There's people that want to just see a snippet of information about that property, where it's the maintenance, where it's the leasing team, where it's someone that's going on the property website. And that's really kind of where the technology is being driven into, kind of these user-friendly dashboards, where I don't need to digest loads and loads of information before I can access what I need. I can have a dashboard which is visually nice to see. I can click into the information, I can drill into it as quick as I need to, depending on what my role is. And I think that is kind of the main place that we're headed to with the products, in terms of that user experience and the ease of use. And then the other thing, as I mentioned when we were kind of just talking before, the dialogue now, is that we are very much trying to strengthen and stabilize more and more the product, which is, in residential. Now, in residential, I started off and we were kind of, building on, I guess, the build to rent products. So things like the marketing and the leasing. But actually, I think now we're coming to a point where we've done that, and we've done it really well. But actually now, in terms of, we've got student and co-living and kind of all of the other variances of residential and rental in the rental sector, that actually now we're really well equipped to kind of have solutions for our clients, which either focus just on that, kind of student or build to rent and so on, or also that mixed portfolio. And we're seeing a lot of that, clients, saying, we've got build to rent, we want to do student, or we've got student, we want to have a little branch of, private rented accommodation and so on. So I think that's where the product's headed, and it's really exciting time, because the development team are working super hard in terms of making the changes, trial and error. Some things aren't always going to be perfect, but those are then of course gone into testing and multiple times, so on. So I think we're trying to do things now which are kind of more UK led, as opposed to some people thinking that we develop only in the US and then it comes down to here. And I think that's the one thing that I think is really important, that actually, for instance, with student in the UK is very much being led by what is happening on the ground in the UK, talking with people within the sector, some of our clients who are using the product, really being a dialogue and a partnership with them to learn what they need, as opposed to it was developed in the US and it's trickling down. It's actually the UK is what's driving that at the moment.
So can you give us a sneak peek of anything exciting that Yardi are developing at the moment that you're allowed to talk about, of course?
That I'm allowed to talk about? Yeah, absolutely. So we have, at the moment, we are working on launching our automated, it's called chatbot, actually. So using things like, and I don't know if you've been on ChatGPT, and I went through a time when all I was doing was trying to quiz it and ask it questions and things, and and people are doing crazy things on it, like write me an essay and things like that. So we're essentially, kind of on that kind of same line as automated communications and using artificial intelligence. We are actually launching something which is basically a chatbot, which enables for on your marketing websites, or for residents, whoever that may be, that actually what they can do is they can go ahead and get information quickly. And that could either be, you either want to speak to a human, because that's still super important. And the worst thing I have when I go into a website is, a bot saying, I don't understand the question. So we have two options, which we're basically throwing out, which is either you say, I want to speak to someone live, and you have a dialogue with them back and forth online or via text and so on. Or actually for things like, where can I schedule a tour, or where can I do XYZ? There's a bot which actually helps to not only give you an answer quicker, but also actually what that bot is doing is it's constantly learning from what it's being asked. So it's using artificial intelligence, but it's also using what our clients and, whoever that is, what their kind of FAQs and commonly used questions are, to get better answers, to give them stronger kind of answers to questions and things. So yeah, watch this space. Artificial intelligence is not just ChatGPT, and it's definitely something that we are embracing.
So it's come a long way since Voyager. Now we're talking about chatbots and AI. So this is a bit of a double-edged question, so forgive me. But if there was one thing you're campaigning for the development team to design or implement, or is it something customers are asking, particularly in the UK? What's the one thing that you're campaigning for to be developed?
That's a really good question. And I think it's unfair for me to say that it's, I've thought of it on my own, because I think, as you do demos and things, I can't take credit, because there's people, there's people ask me things sometimes, and I'm like, that's a really good question. And then I go away and I'm like, why didn't I think of that? I think the thing that is really, really important at the moment is that we're kind of looking into, but it's still something that's really kind of ambiguous, is actually, in terms of, I don't know if you ever heard the term dynamic pricing. So dynamic pricing really is different to everyone, but I think the reason I would like to see something happen with it is simply because with the cost of living and kind of everything happening, I think it's really kind of easy for a lot of people to say, we're trying to drive prices down and so on. And I think in terms of the pricing, I think what needs to happen is you can't set prices of accommodation once a year and think that's going to be fine for the rest of the year, because things change. You're either, going to put your prices down slightly, you might raise them when there's a little bit more demand. And I think actually that there needs to be something which works out how much demand actually is there realistically for that particular room or whatever, and actually what would be the ideal price point for that. So I think that's one of the things that we've been asked a lot actually by our clients, and clients mostly ask it to drive prices up, whereas actually what I want to see is a fair price that's being added. So i.e., if things aren't very much in demand, or they're trying to get rid of the last few, something that can enable it to even go down, but with sort of some logic behind it and so on.
So moving a completely different topic, you're qualified to teach Zumba.
I am. But God knows who gave me that.
Where did that come from?
So when I was at university, I actually started taking Zumba classes and I loved it. And it was something super different. And to be honest, I will say, firsthand, I absolutely hate running on a treadmill or, being in a gym environment. I hate it. It daunts me. Every time I go there, I'm like, don't know really what I want to do. I'm tired. I want to go home. And actually, even plucking up your mindset to go to the gym in the first place is really hard for people, and me included. So I started doing classes because, again, it's that thing, I like to be around people and somebody needs to motivate me and tell me to push myself for me to do it. And that's very much true with exercise. So I went to classes and I really loved it, and I thought to myself, I could maybe try my dab hand at this. So then I went on to, and I think it was an online course that you did, and then you had to give your kind of exam, which was you had to build up a routine and do it in front of an audience. And I was super, super scared actually to do it, but I really loved it. And so I got it. And then I had this plan, which never really happened, which was, oh, I'm going to start doing my own Zumba classes. But, life got in the way. I never actually started practicing it. But you never know. I might use it at some point.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've come to quick fire round questions now. So if you could change one thing about the world, what would it be?
I think I would change the education that we give to children about things like mental health and how to empathize and be kinder to people that maybe aren't the same as them, people with disabilities, people with mental health problems. I think the problem that we have is that we aren't teaching and ingraining it into our children early enough, and I think that really rings true in kind of all forms of their adult life. So I think there's still a massive stigma with things like mental health and people struggling. I think the way that my mum working as a carer, some of the stories she tells me about vulnerable adults and people with learning difficulties and how different they're treated by people, to me is still really, really shocking, because I just think to myself, we're in a world where we have all of the education and all of the resource needed to understand it. So why are we not teaching children from kind of an earlier age that these things can happen and how they can deal with that in their kind of adult life? So that is what I would change.
And I definitely think we should be banging the drum for that. That's for certain. And what advice would you give to someone who wants to change their direction but doesn't know where to start?
I would just say you have to push yourself and do it. I think even if you are scared of something, or if you feel, that there is so many red flags about doing something or moving, I think it's better to have something that you try and maybe doesn't work than to never have tried something and look back and think, oh, I really wish I'd done that in my earlier years or before, after I graduated and so on. So I think, definitely do things that challenge you, but also don't be afraid of them actually maybe not materializing in the way that you want them to be, because that's okay as well, and you will always find your feet.
And what's going to be your next big change?
Oh God, well, talking about what I've done previously, guys, I don't know, maybe I'll be a pilot or something. I don't know, that's a really good question. I think I haven't really thought about it so much lately because there's already been quite a lot of change in my life recently. So, of course, work-wise, I'm pretty kind of stable and so on. But we just got, a new house. I just bought property in London, which was a doer-upper. And, that has been a massive change. And it's been super challenging, in London, and a house that was, I was living in a construction site for ages. So I think I don't have a big change in plan at the moment. I think I need to have kind of some stability in where I'm at right now. And that's more kind of personal life in terms of the house and so on. But I'm sure there will be something in the next couple of months or maybe years' time where I think, oh, I'm going to go and do X. And I probably will go and do that, considering how I've jumped career paths. But for now, I'm just really content with where I'm at. And, I'm just taking things at my own pace.
And if you were to recommend someone for me to speak to on the podcast, who would it be?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Now, I'm going to be biased and actually use somebody from my organisation. I don't know if that's allowed. You can drop that out if you want. But I would say Neil Gamasma, who is who's basically I would say senior. He's our vice president, and I would say he is a absolute wealth of knowledge in terms of not only the industry, but he has done some crazy kind of career shifts and moves and things, and he's really, really interesting actually. So I think that should be the next person on your list.
Oh,
And I'm sure he'd be more than willing to do it as well.
We'll certainly reach out to Neil and see if we can get an episode recorded. Megi, just want to say thank you for obviously joining me. I love talking through your career story, particularly through student accommodation and hospitality, with a few different bits thrown in there as well. And I think certain people can take some great advice in pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, because you never know what might lead. And it seems like every time you've done that, albeit you've had challenges along the way. We talked about, moving to London was a huge one. They've always led on to bigger and better things. So hopefully people can take that advice. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you so much.